Hello, everyone, and welcome to my thesis presentation via Zoom. This is not how I imagined I would be delivering my senior project, but I am so glad that you've joined me here in my bedroom to talk about my project. Okay, here we go. I'm first going to speak a little bit about my paper, which is titled Unladylike: Political Participation and White Womanhood in Southern Gothic Literature. And then I'll briefly explain how I chose my topic, why it was interesting to me, and how my interests evolved as my project progressed. So, my thesis is about the way white women used the Southern Gothic literary tradition to make political claims about the symbolic and participatory role of their own identity in Southern history and in mid 20th century Southern politics. Southern white women's bodies are traditionally symbols of purity. The antebellum Southern belle represents everything about Southern tradition or decorum, and their symbol works to absolve both white women and the South more generally from their wrongdoings. So, with that as grounding context, my claim is that white women authors of the Southern Gothic repurposed the symbol of white womanhood to make a new and updated assertion about their own identity. Whereas white women's bodies used to be pure, now they are grotesque and they represent the social evils of the wider South. Southern Gothic white women are often violent, they're ugly, they're lonely, they're strange. And this is especially interesting to me because it was white women themselves who wrote about their own identity in this way. This was certainly the first organized move for white women to write about racism and classism with an acknowledgement of their own culpability in the South. And I discuss how the implementation of the accountability measures which exist in fiction is flawed in the life of the authors, and how, despite their instances of personal racism and classism, their texts remained important and well read and have had an impact on Southern white women's politics. As I explain in greater detail in my paper, most Southerners, white women included, had very little political capital in the region. And I discuss the constraints particular to white women and how their constraints are unique because those qualities which limit the influence of a white woman are also that which afford her the limited power she possessed. Not only this, but the extent to which white women could control their environment manifested often in racism and elitism. And then to top all of that off, their position is very much constrained to the private sphere. And that's where literature comes in as a powerful intervention into white women as a class of political actors whose effect on the world is measurable and cannot be written off as some set of domestic whims. Storytelling might not often be thought of as a political act if a text is not explicitly about politics. The Southern Gothic is not explicitly about politics. I posit because its texts are written by and about people who are not politically powerful, even if they are politically involved. But the Southern Gothic still evaluates and makes claims about political issues in the South. The particular conventions of the genre developed to accommodate the kind of commentary authors like O'Connor, McCullers, and Welty wanted to make about their life, about Southern life, about political exclusion and economic instability, and the social ostracization that comes from the combination of those two things. For white women, fiction represented an opportunity to take a political stance about issues that affected them in the public sphere from their place in the private sphere. In order to treat white women characters like valuable and impactful political actors, authors necessarily had to speak to the deficiencies of their community in its historic use of the symbol of white womanhood. So, through my text based analysis, we see Southern Gothic authors endorse or rebuke white women characters' stance on political issues related to race and to class, and obviously to gender, and most important to me, and most interestingly to me, morality. Even still today, the Southern Gothic remains a space for that kind of speech. And the kinds of dissenters who use fiction for political purposes are much more varied. and reflective of our contemporary Southern experience. So the Southern Gothic has very much evolved. It's become more complicated since the time frame relevant to my paper, and that's important to me. I think it really speaks to the value and the longevity of the importance of these texts. As for how I decided to pick my topic, well, I knew I wanted to write about the South, and I knew I wanted to write about gender. In my earlier undergraduate years, I took a lot of theory-based classes, and I really enjoyed those courses. I loved them all. And then more recently, I've taken classes that are about economic leaning policies, and while those classes are valuable, I found them way less fun. So I was pretty certain that I wanted to work with texts. I also knew that I wanted to do something relatively interdisciplinary for a thesis written within one discipline. So I think that's what ultimately drew me to fiction. I really like to read, I read a lot. And from there, it was easy to pick the Southern Gothic because the Southern Gothic is one of my favorite genres, and there's been a great deal written on the subject before. It took me a lot longer to focus on white womanhood specifically. Early on in the process of writing my paper, I had a lot going on. I wanted to talk about like 10 different authors in multiple texts in conversation with one another, and it was a complete mess. And I was speaking to my third reader, Professor Caballero, and I was talking about how interesting it was that none of the authors that I had selected were mothers, even though they wrote about mother characters and had really important relationships with their own moms. And I was like, that's odd that even if they're married, they have no children. But then I got to thinking, why is that odd? Why is that even noticeable to me? And it's really because of the symbolic value of white womanhood in Southern culture and in my own life and in politics. That speaks to why I believe that the role that these authors would have occupied was somehow related intrinsically to domesticity. And I really wanted to explore that. And from there, my project unfurled pretty easily and excitingly. I have learned so much from this process and from Newcomb. I had a very fulfilling thesis experience. It was a lot of fun. I read a ton, and I feel very grateful to my cohort and to my professors. So thanks to everyone who watched this. I'm grateful that all y'all chose to spend a little time with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.